So how am I going to wrap all this up? The short version of it is that I can say without any doubt that these individuals were found as they were buried. This is the first time they've been exposed to the elements when that tree had fallen down, because they're in anatomical position, the arms were crossed on A, and we have associated objects with these individuals. There are tacks on the casket, which are clear indication of intentional burial, and again, looking at the tacks as a potential indicator of status, as well as some of these muscle markinations that I described, something that we need to keep addressing and review further. C, the child that was at the base of the monument is associated with this marble, which we're associating as a funerary object, and that is a relatively unusual recovery. And both as an osteologist and as a parent, it's very poignant to find the fact that you've got a child's toy kind of located with this individual. All individuals show some health issues, and I really want to focus down on just what does this tell us about colonial times. I want to bring it back to the stuff that Judith was talking about in the beginning. And what you need to look at is that the great thing about this city, there are many great things about it, but one of the best is that the record keeping at this time is phenomenal. And this age class distribution just basically shows what kind of people were living in New Haven in 1787. At the same time, we have death records that have been compiled as well, indicating the rates of mortality between 1763 and 1786. And if you look at the patterns of those slices of time, the first thing you'll notice is that kids die. And kids die all over the world. We're fortunate, and you never appreciate how fortunate you are until you realize in most populations, in most environments, children suffer from a lot of health and disease issues. When we talk about access to food and things like that for New Haven, while we're dealing with the fact that New Haven is a cosmopolitan city, it is still tied to the resources of the landscape. It is still tied to what food it can get. And because we are in a seasonal environment, it's most likely that things may have occurred in this environment that would lead to periodic food stress for these children. And with this pattern of occasional food shortage, we can expect that we'll see those lines that we saw before. One of the things that we're going to be focusing on, again with the isotopic analysis, is that if you are focusing more on a fish-based or a marine-based diet versus an agricultural or a terrestrial meat diet, those lead different signatures. So I'm very excited that hopefully next year we'll have another one with hard cider. Disease is a big deal, and it was very clearly pointed out by Judith about how many people had died, and they actually wrote down as they were dying. Colonial American epidemiology, Yale College graduates were practicing medicine during this time period, but you got to remember we're dealing with people putting leeches on people, hoping that's going to make things better. 1790s New Haven is crowded. Crowded means multiple populations. It means multiple individuals moving in and out of a landscape, of an environment. It means that with changes in season, people are either all crowded into houses in the winter, or they're all living in hot, sweaty environments in the summer. If you have lots of people crowded in one place at one time, what do you wind up with? Disease and illness. And that seems to be a big factor that happens here. Now, when these bodies were discovered, when all of this had first occurred, there was a lot of people coming to me, both from the historical record and from research-wise and things like that, and talking about this epidemic of yellow fever that struck the entire East Coast from about 1792 to 1822 or so. Very, very serious sets of events. And the father of American epidemiology in Philadelphia, the reason we have epidemiology today is because of yellow fever. Yellow fever is a very nasty, acute hemorrhagic fever. It is mosquito-borne. And once you get it, especially back in the day, and it's still a problem today, you have a very high mortality rate. The reason I'm bringing this up here isn't just to kind of reinforce the issue about the disease of New Haven, but the fact is that they have really good records of disease in New Haven with individuals and ages of death. And what I found in the historical record, going through 3 or 4 different medical journals and things, most of the people who died are adults. That is not the same as what we have in our center. So then you have to reassess what the historical record says, and then go back and try to figure out what might be the case. In this instance, what we started to look at instead is the fact that before yellow fever, New Haven had been suffering several other things. One of the most serious ones was in January of 1794, there was a scarlet fever outbreak. Scarlet fever is an extremely serious illness. It's a bacterial-borne illness. It is a strep-based illness. It most commonly affects children from 5 to 10. I've had personal experience with this, so I'm quite familiar with the symptoms and danger of scarlet fever as having it as a child. High fever and rash occurs. Who gets scarlet fever? Well, children 5 to 10 are that. The second illness that had passed through here was dysentery. Now, dysentery is what's described in the medical records of the time, but dysentery covers a wide array of waterborne illnesses. Typhoid, cholera, and dysentery all cause the same result. The result is a bloody stool. You lose a lot of fluid, you lose it really, really quickly. It's not treated, it is fatal. And the problem with dysentery, typhoid, and typhus at this time period, same thing. Children 3 to 19 years of age are the ones that are most commonly afflicted and have the highest mortality rate. These events are more consistent with the data that we have at hand and the sample that is present, and so I'm suggesting that our green sample is most likely coming from these kinds of events. Again, this is a hypothesis. We need to keep that in evidence and hopefully some genetic data on the viruses or the bacteria that may be present in the zone will help answer this. There's more questions and answers. We're doing some more work, and like I said, next year we're going to have some more data for you, but to wrap this up for you. There isn't something new I can say about how Colonial New Haven was an urban center. I can say that it's very clear now that while the city, there are good bone indicators that there is environmental resources were finite and occasionally stretched thin. So children obviously would suffer these nutrition and illness issues the most. The late 1790s saw these waves of epidemic that hit New Haven, and the New Haven Green wound up becoming completely saturated with both the dead from the early colonies to these waves of individuals that are passing away at a frightening rate, and there's nowhere to put all these bodies. So just as Dr. Schiffer pointed out, Grove Cemetery had to be created to deal with these epidemics and change the landscape of the city and the use of the green. What these bones are telling us is they're telling us about the childhood nutrition, disease, and stress in colonial New Haven. And this tree fall, many people have been asking me about, exposes more than just some old buildings. It changes the dynamic of understanding how our city works, because it's revealing, in a larger sense, our own children and our own relatives to us. Spending time looking in the faces of any of these individuals, while they're only fragmentary in one respect, they are people, and there are things that they're telling us about their lives we would have never known unless this opportunity had come. And ultimately, these bones are bringing their history and our history to life. It's important for me at this point to recognize the efforts of all the research team members that have been involved here, as well as all the city and municipal individuals that have helped out. I got to thank my family who are out trick-or-treating, so I'm in the doghouse. I got to thank my colleagues in my department. I got to thank Drew and the community very much. And I do have to thank, obviously, these individuals up here. A very big vote of thanks to my colleague and friend Nick D'Antoni. Nick and I have been doing a couple of these kind of projects now, and I got to say it's been a pleasure and an honor, so thank you very much. And I want to thank you guys. Questions? Or? Yeah. I'm sorry, you speak up?
What happened with the wood?
What happened with the wood? No, tell me, the wood? Where is the wood from the casket?
No, the wood from the tree.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant wood from the casket.
It's now being held by the Department. We're going to determine what might be done with the wood. We made it very nothing. Public to the city and other parts of the city.
Yes.
Did you excavate the below the tree root bed, or did you?
No, because of the fact that we knew that the more we would dig, the more we would find. To be clear on the outset, now what this was a recovered or salvaged operation, and not one where we keep extending. There was absolutely no question, and there still is no question, that any operations on the green are going to have the potential and probably exposure of more than 3 trees. Yes.
Plans on the reburial?
Plans to reburial ongoing. Turn it over to Mr. Bates.
Yes, the passage of the 3 churches on the green agreed to oversee a reinterment of the remains.